Well, hello, I am that Weems guy, and we are here for another episode of our very moderately growing show. The average 30-day average for episodes has jumped to 221. This is the first time we've topped 200, and it's jumped significantly. I got people called me today wanting to know what the current revenue was, since we joked about that on previous episodes. Guys, we are up to $22.51. $22.51. And we do have our first monthly sponsor. If you are interested in being a monthly sponsor of the show, you can do that through Anchor. If whatever podcast feed you're listening to the podcast on, there should be a link that shows up in the show notes. So, Mr. Keith, thank you for sponsoring. And so both guys that contacted me today both also asked about that. So that is available out there. The YouTube episodes, and I'm getting feedback from one of you guys. The YouTube viewership's 250 to 300 per episode within the first week or two of it coming out. Tonight, I should name this episode the Top 40 because we got all the hits. We got all the hits here with us tonight. Tonight, we have Mr. Daryl Bolke. Daryl, if you would say hello to everybody.
Hello, everybody.
All right. Daryl's been on the show before. You should know Daryl. And our next guest doesn't need any introduction because everyone knows who industry luminaries are. But Mr. Dobbs, if you would be kind enough to tell the people who are not grace enough to know of your presence and your stature who you are.
I'm Wayne Dobbs, and I can't believe Rich Grossi said that about me the other day.
You know, Masa Youb referred to me as Lee Weems' ace police trainer in an article that he wrote one time, and I almost had business cards made. And that was all I was going to say. Lee Weems' ace police trainer. I was going to walk around at gun events just handing them out. So, you know, but what I read when Rich Grossi referred to you as the industry luminary, and I'm sitting there going, well, yeah, I know him. That's good. All right, folks. Wayne and Daryl co-own a training business in Dallas, Texas, and we will get back to that later on. Both gentlemen were also in the class that we reviewed last week with Mr. Larry Mudgett, but unfortunately they couldn't be available for the recording of that episode. And so we're going to start this episode with each of them giving a chance to add anything they want to add to what we said last time. So if you haven't listened to that episode, you can go back and listen to it for a full review of the class. But I'm going to throw it first to Daryl because he's got some very personal things he would like to say about Larry, and then would like to kind of go into some other information we didn't discuss last time. So Daryl, it's all yours.
Yeah, you know, you've done the podcast with Kegel in the past, talking about, you know, kind of your base core training thing, that what you're basing how you're training on a system. And I was blessed in 1989 that my core system of how I do things came directly from Larry Mudgett in 1989. I was assigned to be in charge of training our SWAT team, which I was wholly unqualified for, and pulled some industry connections in through Ron McCarthy to get me out there at LAPD SWAT with, and I spent, you know, a training week with Larry and the firearms cadre out there at D team. And, you know, I talk to people about how you build a house of your training. And the key to any of that is having an exceptionally good foundation. And Larry Mudgett was my foundation. I mean, Larry and the team of guys he had, you know, I had Scotty Reitz back then. I had John Helms. I had Ralph Morton, you know, and others out there that were part of that firearms cadre. And that's what I built my house on. And over the years, I've added rooms to it. I've done a couple kitchen remodels on a few things, but the basic core kind of everything I do came from Larry. And it was interesting for me to go back out and train with him 30 years plus later. And, you know, I missed out on a lot of his basic marksmanship because when I went out with him, he was training SWAT at that point. They were past sort of the initial ways to train new people. But I was well aware of what he did up at the LAPD Academy. And it was just an interesting travel back to how blessed I was to get somebody who teaches at that level. And it was nice for us to be able to invite some industry friends to come up with us and do that course. The group of guys we had were all personally invited by Wayne and I to come up with us, because we all felt, that you guys would be a good way to spread kind of the way Larry teaches marksmanship. And we all, a bunch of experienced instructors taking a week-long fundamentals basic A1 course, mainly to see how Larry trains. And I know he appreciated it. Him and I talked a lot before the class, and I said, you're going to get pushback on some of the stuff from these guys on a few things, but we're really, these guys are paying good money. They're paying, non-discounted, just regular old student fees to come watch you teach. And I think it was appreciated by everybody. I got to say, I think we all saw what firearms training for new people should be, particularly for brand new law enforcement. We are doing a massive disservice in this country to training cops, not training them how Larry trains them. And David and I talked, we had 19 hours in the car together after class to review this. And, firearms training needs to be several weeks, and, it needs to be on a program like that. The problem is it's hard. And one of the things we picked up from Larry was, when he got to the academy, there was 12 firearms instructors and not at the level he was at. And the first thing they did is got 50, and then brought on, literally mountains of reserves out there to help. But they went from, 12 instructors to 50 selected instructors to teach that program. It is hard work to teach fundamental marksmanship like that, but as we all saw, the payoff is amazing.
Yeah, I think once someone nails the pure fundamental marksmanship through a system like his, it's not hard to start doing the other stuff. But until you've nailed that fundamental level of stuff, you just can't move on. And unfortunately, every program wants to run and jump right into the other stuff because you nailed it. There's just not any time. My academy class, we have, quote, range week. Well, really, we had range 2.5 days.
The instructor to student ratios are horrific.
Yeah. And the instructors that we had just walked behind and said, "You're jerking the trigger. You're jerking the trigger." Like if somebody was pulling a string on their back, you're jerking the trigger. And I remember one time I asked one, I said, "Okay, well, how do I fix it?" And he said, "Stop jerking the trigger." And it was all I could do. It was all I could do to go, "Well, thank you, sir. So just thank God you were here." And I knew at that point that I was probably pushing it, and that wouldn't have gone well. Wayne, I'd like to hear your insights.
Well, there's so many places you could start. And Daryl's already hit on it, that we are, as a whole in the United States, doing a terrible disservice to the line officers, to the departments, and to the publics they serve on how we teach in firearms to people. We're not doing a good job. And in fact, I say that most American most American police training barely hits mediocre. That's an ugly thing to say, but it is the truth from my perspective. Larry's method takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of devotion to the task. And I don't see that as being the norm in most training operations out there today. There are some exceptions, but they are just that, exceptions. His whole structured program of setting the context first with the student of what this is all about, why we are where we are, what is the purpose of the pistol, in other words, what is its mission, And there is a very specific mission for it. And we all know the word. And what was the word? It was unexpected problems. That's what a pistol's for. And he's clear about delineating what the various missions of various police weapons are. He communicates clearly what the context of the defensive pistol is. He communicates the mental aspects of the whole thing, the mindset. He communicates the marksmanship principles. He communicates the manipulations principles. And then he takes you out there and for the second day, literally grinds you into the ground on dry manipulations. And if you try to pull that off in most police academies, they would show you the door at high speed as an instructor, because what they're looking for is a check the box program that gets just about everybody qualified on an unrealistic target at unrealistic times at too close a distances. Larry clearly has a talent and a passion to do that. And I'm no Larry Mudgett, but I was sitting there thinking how I had the talent and the passion to do the same thing. And the reception I got was to be slapped down and said to hurry up. So it was a bit gratifying to see that. One thing that keeps on sticking out at me, and it's not just for the police, it's probably more prevalent or more applicable to us non-law enforcement people. And Daryl, I know you remember this, and Lee, you will too. He said, you need to replace fear with knowledge. And when he said that, I was just like, that's the nugget that I traveled here for.
Yeah, I put that in my notes. As soon as he said it, I'm like, typing it into my phone. Actually, I think I put that in my computer that day because we were in the classroom when he said that, didn't he?
Yes, we were.
I saw you writing, and I think I saw everybody's pen or everybody start typing immediately when they said that.
Yeah, and it's the truth. When you get right down to it, and it's hard to communicate to most people that if you have competence and skill and knowledge and the ability to deal with anything, whatever the situation might be, the most prevalent one we can show it with is driving under stress or anything, is if we're a good driver, well trained and know how to execute the tasks, then virtually no driving situation is too much for us to handle within the realm of norm or normal. It's the same thing with dealing with bad guys on the street. If you have the skill, the knowledge, and the competence, you can handle that. And I think all three of us have demonstrated that without having to shoot anybody. You simply, you take control of a situation. You go to, as Daryl calls it, the metro draw or the low ready or the guard, whatever you want to call it. And it's amazing how the attitudes change.
Yeah, and when the bad guy looks at you and it's obvious you're prepared for what's about to happen,
oh yeah,
it shows and they know it. And there's been several times and that I've faced off with a bad guy that if it had actually gone hand to hand, there's no way in the world I could have taken them. Absolutely no way in the world I could have taken them, just because they were that much, physically spirited. I mean, everything. But I could just sit there and look at them and say, well, if you want to go, we'll go. But be prepared that you're going to get a thump or two, or it might not be a fist fight. And that kind of tends to back them off a little bit when they know that that they're actually up against some prepared opposition. I'm going to actually go back to Wayne with a question first, because it's going to be a different question for Daryl. Wayne, I asked all the other guys last week, what was the one thing you took away as a teaching tool? And then to follow up with that, what was the one thing you learned about you specifically as a shooter? So I'd like for you to answer both of those.
As a teaching tool, what I got was something that I had been, I guess, to be critical on me, I had been muddling along with for literally 35 years. Larry has a battery of trigger drills. He calls them, I've always called them interactive trigger drills. I've also heard them called exemplar drills. He used a flight training analogy and said you share the controls. But he has a battery of 4 trigger drills that have been out there to actually teach with a field experience to a student what proper trigger control feels like. And I had worked my own way through it and used those drills for literally 35 years. I first saw them in 1985 in an article he wrote. It was good to get to stand there with the guy that developed those drills or collated those drills and had analyzed them and presented them. It was great to see exactly what the thinking was and exactly what the application was for those drills. And I saw some variations on them that I hadn't considered before. That was one thing that I took away from there from Larry. From me, not arrogant, not anything like that, but the realization that over the years I have really refined how to press a trigger. I didn't struggle with any of the shooting that he showed, and I got a kick out of John Hearn. He was buddying with me one time while we were doing trigger drills, and if you remember on it's not ball and dummy, what does he call it?
Skip loading.
Skip loading. You know, he said I've got to watch. He said, Wayne, I've got to watch your trigger finger to see when you press the trigger because I can't see any motion in the muzzle or the front side at all. And I've worked that hard, and I guess part of that I took away from it that was super valuable was the concept, and I heard you talking about it on the other podcast, is that we are making deposits into the bank. We're making an investment by skip loading and dry practice and dry trigger practice drills. And when you're doing a lot of live fire, you're drawing that account down because you may be letting things creep in there that are not fundamentally what they ought to be. So that's what I took away.
All right. Daryl, as you have been a longtime student of Larry, and you've been exposed, I know you said you hadn't been through like his basic course. What struck you different in this time and from what you have already seen from Larry? Was like there anything you're like, oh, now a light bulb went off, or
yeah,
oh, that's how we get here? Go ahead.
I mean, I was familiar with how Larry teaches those interactive trigger drills and all that. Wayne and I are old enough and gray enough, and Wayne's older than I am. So of pulling all these old articles, I mean, my complete set of Fighting Firearms is one of those cherished thing of a group of magazines that actually sit in the library. They don't sit in a box somewhere. Where a lot of that was published before the old NTOA magazine, stuff like that. I have a lot of that still. So I was familiar with Larry doing that, but that's not what I had Larry for. Was how to teach a SWAT team, how to develop and train a firearm side of a SWAT team. Now, a lot of the stuff I've gotten over the years is because I've always been fairly close to guys at the LAPD firearms cadre, including guys who taught for Larry. I mean, who were brought in by Larry as those core firearms instructors. So I'm familiar with it, but it was kind of interesting to go out and get that level of the fundamental side directly from it. Because what I was getting was how to apply that type of stuff to a SWAT team who should have basic trigger drills down. They didn't, but his guys were already past that point when I was out there, if that makes sense. So I didn't get to see a lot of that. I got to see how you apply a lot of it. But a couple of core things that came away from that is, I've been blessed to, share a training organization with Wayne, who, up until that class, I've told people I've never, and haven't been on triggers with Wayne. Wayne didn't need that as bad as the rest of us did. Wayne has one of the most refined trigger presses, and I have never felt a better trigger press from anybody until I got on the line. And if you guys saw when he took the volunteer for the very first one for him to get on a trigger with you, I pushed everybody out of the way to get up there first to make sure that I got on a trigger with Larry. And Larry's input onto a trigger was literally imperceptible. Yeah. And the only one I've ever been on a trigger with like that is remotely close is Wayne. And my big takeaway, and a lot of you guys were talking about it because we all found the same thing, and I kind of diagnosed it a little different than everybody else did, is how many of us noticed that we have an over travel problem. And the reason we all have an over travel problem is, I think, twofold that pointed out, and this is a bunch of people have been teaching for decades, are sitting there identifying problems that we have that were kind of undiagnosed. And the reason is like, for me in particular, I am a compulsive flincher. And I'm not a flincher and then I'm afraid of the gun going bang. I'm smart enough to know when that trigger is going to break. And I start setting, I'm an early recoil anticipator and presetting that recoil and doing some things. And it's a constant fight. It's a lot of reasons why I shoot a DA gun, is a lot of that gets taken out. But the reality is, I also, and it's gotten particularly bad over the last about decade because my arthritis has gotten so bad in my hands, is Wayne and Larry both shoot with a finger that is like a noodle. I mean, there's no, their input is so soft, they have no real tension in their trigger fingers. And, you know, I was partnered up with Kegel, who's literally half my age. And him and I both shoot with a very, very, stiff, non-supple trigger finger, which adds to part of the problem. And one of the things this class did, because they were so hard on every press of the trigger and how we did it, is all of us got rid of any recoil anticipation whatsoever. We got rid of all the pre-ignition dip of the front sight, movement of the front sight. We all got rid of that fairly quickly, just because we were probably good students on having that beat into us. And we basically got rid of an excuse. It's just a little pre-recoil ignition push, and we don't really see it when we're out there shooting fast, and all these excuses we've been making over the years. The reality is just all of us got rid of that. And then we all found out, oh my God, I got an over travel problem too. Not only did I have a little push on that, a little dip before it went off, I'm slamming that trigger into the back of the frame, and I'm getting post-ignition movement as well. And I think that class and being that detailed on that trigger really helped all of us to really diagnose ourselves, which down the road will help us diagnose students. I'm finding I'm actually just a little bit of change on the trigger I'm going to probably end up replacing or moving my finger a little differently in the trigger that I think will address some of it. But that is a pretty high level of diagnosis. A lot of people over the last several years, and I'm going to kind of delve into something a little new here, is none of us liked the way Larry grips a pistol. I think we're all past that. He uses an old cross thumbs. I look at Larry, I look at guys like Paul Howe, I look at Scott Reed. Some of these guys, they don't go out and train with a bunch of other people. They are highly successful at what they do. They are master class level instructors with as much as experience, proving their methodology works, that they don't need it. And I look at these guys, the analogy is I'm going to use is that refrigerator that's in the garage that belonged to your grandmother. And grandma's refrigerator's been around since the 50s and still keeps stuff cold perfect. It still works perfect. It doesn't make ice. It doesn't give you water. You don't get to select cubes or crushed. It doesn't tell you when the filter needs to be changed, because none of that stuff exists. It keeps stuff cold, period. And it does an amazing job of it. It's been doing it for literally 3/4 of a century, where now you go buy a brand new something and it's done in 3 years, the day the warranty runs out or the computer chip fails. So I look at those guys like that. And while none of us particularly like the way Larry gripped the pistol, once we started, when you take that factor out, it all comes down to trigger and sights. And that's what Larry really fixes. And the reality that I found investigating all those shootings I did and all the stuff and where I saw failures, when unexpected gunfights took place with law enforcement, you know what the problem 90% of the time was? Grip. So now how do you fix grip? You fix grip with trigger and sights. And that's why it's so hard on my guys about that. We have a lot of people teaching now that they've got grip down to the point where gripping guns that the other controls don't even work. That's how, we're placing that much emphasis. And you can bang that trigger with a hammer, and the grip is such a death grip on the gun that it'll function and work. But when you take that out of the equation, Larry breaks this down into the little pieces of how we're looking at sights, which for all of us was an eye opener at how Larry looks at sights versus how we've been looking at sights and teaching it. Larry breaks the trigger down, probably different than all of us have been doing it. And then, and uses Weaver, which has been the most, I've always known what the difference is, but most people don't. They think it's where your feet are, not how you're applying pressure. And my thing with Weaver is I use both. If you're inside of a vehicle, you don't have a lot of choice, you're compressed, I'm using isometric tension to stabilize the gun. If I'm using it with a handheld flashlight, I'm using isometric tension to stabilize the gun. If you got a wide open shooting problem, go ahead and use bone and muscle structure to stabilize the gun. Don't care. Doesn't really matter. You can use all of it together. You can some of it, half of it, doesn't matter. But the grip is going to be one of those things that if you apply a incredibly efficient grip for the pistol or revolver or the handgun you're using, if you apply a very efficient grip to that tool, the whole conversation we had about being one with a machine, I take a lot of that with grip. You can operate all the controls real easily. You're not interfering with controls, and you have maximum purchase on that machine. And then you can apply a trigger press like this, combined with the way we're looking at sights. And man, you can do some amazing work on those guns. Amazing work on these guns. And that's truly, that was the biggest thing I got out of this, man, one with that machine. Be it one with your machine.
Yeah. So. I commented on it in the episode last week with those guys about the over travel. That was like the big thing from my personal skill point of view, was actually diagnosing and seeing how much over travel that I was getting. Wayne, I don't know if you've listened to that full episode yet. I commented there where you made a comment about your trigger finger should be like a limp noodle or something like that. And
trigger finger's completely relaxed.
I made note of that, but I didn't it didn't register with me in class. And when I got home, I got in hand and settled down. I laid down in my bed, and that all of a sudden that thought just like jarred me back awake. And I got up and I got out a pistol and I dry practiced for a minute. And why didn't I catch this, on the range? Because we were getting so much information thrown at us. I think it was just kind of hard to process everything that you were getting. But I could see an immediate difference in the reduction in over travel just from doing that.
Yeah. I've been on the relaxed trigger finger bandwagon for many, many, many years. I don't know how long. I know this, that a good solid grip and a relaxed trigger finger and a straight back press, you get good results. If I find a shooter, and I'll walk the line, Daryl's watched me do it in classes, and I'll sit there and grab trigger fingers or feel trigger fingers while they're on while they're in register. And man, you'll find some guys that they're putting 20 pounds of pressure on the side of the frame with a trigger finger. And I'm like, dude, relax that thing, get it all loose and limp. Because if I find somebody that's doing that, 100% of the time, they will have a god awful anticipation or flinch or whatever you want to call it, because what they're doing is combining trigger effort with grip effort, and that is physically going to move that gun off the line of sight and cause a bad shot. It's you can take it to the bank every time you see it. If you can get them to relax their trigger finger, they will do much better. And in fact, I'll ask a lot of these guys, because you can sit there and look at their physique and see that they work hard. And I say, are you using Captains of Crush grip strength builders or stuff like that? And they're like, oh yeah. And they talk, I'm up to a number, number 3 or whatever impossible number there is out there. And I'm like, so do you use your index finger when you're doing that? And they're like, yeah. And I says, quit doing that. Because you're teaching your index finger to be overpowering on the trigger. Just do the other 3 fingers. And they look at you like, well, I can't do as high a number if I do that, because they got so much grip effort with that index finger. But shooting a pistol well, and I'll steal Larry Vickers' saying that I heard from him God, 15 years ago now, I guess. He said, shooting a pistol is simple, but it's not easy. And he's right. There is a lot of technique in it. And I think because of that involvement of technique and power, you got to have powerful grip and loose finger and technique on sights and trigger press, et cetera. It doesn't lend itself to something that we can institutionalize and teach in an academy setting to the level we really need to. And certainly you look at it in the military and it doesn't take place. And it's a high threshold of achievement to get that done.
There you go. All right. Before we move on to our next topic, Wayne, do you have anything else you want to say about the Larry class?
It was 4 days of the hardest training work I've done in a long, long time.
All right, Daryl?
Yeah, we were beat, but old, just beat. And then the problem is you can't cry about it because Larry's 74.
I know.
And then
he had to be hurting.
Yeah, and then you look at when Larry came down and got onto my pistol when we were doing that reaction drill off the timer, and hammers a 1-1, a 1-2, a 1-1, a 1-1, and a 1-1 on that wagon trigger. And we're all sitting there going, he's 74 and he's throwing these 1-1s out like they're nothing on reaction time. And you're going, oh my goodness. But one of the benefits that I picked up that I didn't realize before was Larry's background as a pilot. And, he relates a lot back, and that really struck with me because at one point in my life, I did learn how to actually fly an MD-500 helicopter. That was my daily ride to work, and was in my best interest to learn how to fly good in case one of those pilots took a dive. And, that a lot of this is obviously came from there because getting on controls with each other to instruct and very soft inputs. I can usually pick up people who are good pilots because their inputs on machines tend to be very light. They're precise, but very light. There's not a lot of hammering on stuff. And inputs are slow, very controlled. Even when they're doing stuff fast, it's extremely controlled. And, I kind of got a lot out of this as far as getting on the controls with Larry. And feeling Larry's inputs on controls set a very good example of what this is supposed to look like. And, my only goal at this point is not to be out teaching when I'm 74. I need to make sure I'm doing something else at that point. Cause I couldn't do it. I couldn't be teaching 4-day classes at that level. The other thing too is, as instructors, the instructor ratio, he had coaches with us. I mean, we're at, 2-to-1 ratio with instructors. Every 2 students we had one at least AI with too, which is impressive. So yeah, good program. Like I said, it's how we should be training new shooters. And the sad thing is the people who really need that class are most brand new shooters. That's, if you could take people, you want to learn to shoot, you want to buy a gun and own a firearm and be a good American and be able to empower yourself to take care of your own family's safety. That's the class everybody should get first. And the problem is, it isn't cheap, and it's 4 straight days out of your life. And it's a lot of work that I think most people won't put in. Now, he has very good success with very, very new raw shooters, but it takes some dedicated ones to get there first. And sadly, we have a problem probably in this country of a lot of people getting horrific firearms training early on that has to be undone. And like I said, I was blessed to have Larry 30 years ago before I was too far down down the road to not fix it. And I had less to correct from of a few years rather than a few decades of doing things wrong.
He made a comment about taking a motorcycle riding class. And he talked about how he'd been riding a motorcycle for several years. And then he went to a class and realized that he didn't know how to ride a motorcycle.
Right.
Motorcycle Safety Foundations class.
Yeah. And that point kind of stuck in the back of my mind. I've been doing firearms training for getting close to 23 years now. And there were a couple of times in the class, it was kind of like, wow, I wish I had known this right from the start. Or as I began teaching people, there's a couple of things, in his methodology, like I wish I had known this then. And, thankfully I get a pretty good laboratory of getting to work with students on a repeated basis. And so I'll be able to implement this, a lot of his methodology right from the start. And so I'm kind of curious to see how that's going to make things easier for me and how much more quickly the students are going to progress over, some of what we're now calling traditional firearms training. All right. A couple of episodes ago, Daryl came on and he talked about the spread of the modern technique through the West Coast agencies. And then Shane Gosa and I were on, and he was talking about his personal relationship with Jeff Cooper. And Shane's a Georgia lawman like I am, and he and I got to talking and doing some digging and some research. And the best we can tell is that the methodology that the Georgia Public Safety Training Center has adopted came out of John Shaw's Mid-South Institute and Rogers and was kind of melded together. And so I guess that's kind of where my shooting lineage goes. Well, so we've done West Coast, we've done East Coast. Now it's time to go to the Republic. So Wayne, I want you to kind of fill the audience in on what was going on in Texas with firearms training at the same time Daryl was out doing his thing on the West Coast, and that the guys who trained Shane and I were doing here in the Southeast.
So thinking about that, there were a couple of influences that were going on in Texas, maybe three at the time that I started in law enforcement in the late 70s. One of them was clearly Texas DPS. There was a larger than life figure there, and he was huge. He looked like Bill Jordan too. His name was Reeves Junkin, and he ran Texas DPS firearms. Reeves was about 6'7", big old German boy from Atlanta, and had a hand that when he shook my hand, and I've got a big hand, it just disappeared. And Reeves would open up DPS firearms training. He'd have all the trooper recruits sitting on bleachers, and he would say, "Men," and it was all men. There were no women at that time. He'd say, "Men, there are some sorry sons of bitches out here that need killing, and I'm going to show you how we do it." And that was how he would commence DPS firearms training, with Model 28 Smiths, lever action 30-30s, and 870 pump shotguns. And firearms training was about 6 weeks, spread throughout the academy. And it was largely, Reeves was a champion PPC shooter. He was a Python tuner par excellence. And so a lot of his was focused around very precise use of a revolver. But Reeves, I have to say, did an astounding job with Texas DPS, because they were and still are involved in a lot of officer-involved shooting incidents, and they do a very good job, all said and done. They've only, to my way of thinking, have only gotten better over the years, and they're still well lit out there. Although Reeves Junkin is no longer there, obviously. In fact, he's long deceased, and his ways and his beliefs hastened his retirement. How about that? He was anti-semi-automatic, and he was anti-female trooper, and both of those were moves that he was not going to stop, and eventually did him in. Another angle on this was FBI firearms instruction. Back in that time, there was another semi-force of nature by the name of Robert P. Butler, Bob Butler, and he was the primary firearms instructor at the FBI Dallas Division. And Butler was a friend. He was a mentor and a colleague and a friend. I spent several years at the end of his career as a task force officer at the FBI on an organized crime task force. So I got to pick Bob's brain quite a bit. It was also coincidentally right after the '86 Miami shootout that killed 2 agents and wounded several others. And so Bob and I I got to stand literally by his side while information came in and things were discussed about firearms training and ammunition and weapons technology. But what Bob did was he went around Texas back then, teaching firearms instructor schools to various agencies, sheriff's offices, police departments, regional police academies. And he created quite the following. And Bob was a good shooter. It was revolver based. He was very practical. He talked about, he wasn't talking about modern technique, but he was talking about getting flash sight pictures and rolling triggers straight to the rear on revolvers. So that was a huge influence. The third influence was NRA police firearms instruction as far as firearms instructor certification. And it was there, but it didn't have the impact that say the DPS model and that the FBI model had. You had big agencies in Texas, namely Dallas, San Antonio, and Houston, that shot a lot of people back in that era. Dallas was probably having 150 officer involved shootings a year back in the 80s and 90s. They had a pretty good cadre of instruction, and they had leapt onto a training methodology called the Gregg fire control method, which was a target focused shooting inside of say 5 or 7 yards. And the guy's name was Jim Gregg. He was from Oregon or something like that. But Dallas locked onto that and started using that methodology and did very, very well. Now, looking at all of this, whether it's the transition to auto pistols or the Jim Gregg method, or now the move into dot optics on pistols, you know, we look at that and say, well, when we did this, you know, things started going a lot better and we had a lot better success. And I'm wondering if the technology is not the important part. I'm wondering if the fact is that we took everybody and we spent time working on their fundamental approaches and gave them some actual repetition at doing the job right and polished them up a bit, as Paul Howe would say. If the actual training, the intensive training, didn't give us what we got instead of the technology. So that's my perspective on it.
Okay, you know, funny you mentioned the FBI's. That used to be a core mission of the FBI, was to train state and local agencies.
Yes.
And they have gotten away from that to a large degree.
Yeah, they have. Butler was a shining example of that.
Yeah. We had a guy in California named Ron Fragolte, who I had in the academy as a firearms instructor. I was the only cadet that got asked by the instructors. I used to shoot with them at lunch during the academy. I must have been doing something right, because I was invited with a guy from the FBI and the instructors to shoot with them. But, you know, Ron was a real powerhouse in California as far as teaching a lot and stuff. And, you know, Ron was kind of like a lot of us, is, you know, everybody looked at him like he was insane, and he kind of was. He used to do funny stuff at the academy, throw dead rabbits and helicopters when the sheriff's helicopters land, and, you know, sorts of crazy stuff. But, you know, most of those guys, and I'm going to venture Wayne's FBI counterpart down there was the same thing, is Ron was despised by his own organization. These guys did not get along with the mothership of the FBI, I think, as they took all the crazy gun guys. And it's like, yeah, you guys are going to go and teach at the, you know, sheriff's academy and wherever you're at. You know, we'll kind of get rid of you. Ron did not fit the mold of an FBI agent. He was one of the few I got along really well with. So, it was kind of a different thing. But yeah, very influential, and particularly in those revolver days, they had a pretty good methodology for teaching, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, as I first stumbled upon people like Tom Givens and you guys and all of the circle that I now get to run around with, I studied biographies because I like, these are the guys that I want to emulate and be like. So I started studying the biographies, like what classes did they take and what training did they get? Because they're the recognized experts, how did they get there? And one of the things that I used to see in a lot of the guys from that era was the FBI firearms instructor class.
Mhm.
And so I began searching and searching and searching, and finally I stumbled upon one in Alabama. And so I contact the people and I sign up and go. And this would have been about 2013. And so I spent 2 weeks in Gadsden, Alabama. And the lead instructor for the class was a female agent who was 30 something years on at that point in time. Her name was Vicki Davis. And she made a point of saying in front of the whole class, like, look, the FBI's core mission, part of one of our things we're supposed to be doing is training state and local law enforcement. And we've abandoned that. And she said she had been trained by an agent up in upstate New York that had beat it into her head that the FBI was supposed to be doing that, and that she was going to keep doing it as long as she retired. She said there was one other agent currently active somewhere in the US that was of the same mentality, that they were the only two out really strongly training folks. And as a testament to her dedication, we had a government shutdown in the middle of the class, and she got sent a directive to close the class down and go home. And she's like, I've been here 32 years. What are they going to do? Fire me for working for free? And she stayed and ran the rest of the class.
Good.
And I had a talk with a very highly ranked FBI agent probably 2 years ago now. And he was kind of, how can we kind of re-solidify our relationship with the local guys? And my answer to them was, you used to train. Why don't you start doing training? And I said, I'll volunteer our agency. I'll do the legwork as far as like all the class registrations and all that kind of stuff. You guys will just have to show up and teach. I'll have your targets and everything. And it just hasn't come to fruition. And I can't blame him for that, because as we all know, the wheels get rolling sometimes, and that's just where it goes. But, you know,
I think you can stick a fork in that, Lee.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. They're all about terrorism and everything else now, and it's just going to be, there's nothing else for them. You look, and I don't want to get too far down this road of the politics stuff, but, you know, there's had to been other agencies either created or their roles expanded to take up things that the FBI used to do.
Yeah, that's true. And with, you know, to talk about firearms training in law enforcement, it is dismal virtually everywhere. We are not teaching people to shoot. We are teaching people to make piles of fired brass. I submit that we could pull in any kind of representative specimen or cross section of troops and just give them, oh hell, have them shoot a 10-round test or have them shoot a 5-yard roundup, anything like that, and just watch the train drive off the tracks. There's not a fundamental basis for most of them. Most of them are train wrecks with regard to manipulations. Clearly, most of the or many of the fights you see taking place, is clear that there's no mindset or tactical thinking involved. It's just there, and I'm afraid that what we're going to see as time goes on, and Daryl and I have talked about what we see as the future of policing in the United States, and it's only going to get worse and worse and worse. I really am sad, because it's something that, Daryl, you and I poured our hearts and our souls and our bodies into to try to achieve things, and we did achieve good things, all said and done, and it's like it was for naught.
Yeah, you know, one of the things we picked up, you know, Larry went through the same stuff all of us did. You know, when Larry left, you know, they dismantled everything. You know, when Scott Reeds left, dismantled everything. Took my agency 6 months to dismantle everything. But, you know, you had these people, a lot of these agencies, wherever they were. And when we talked about the West Coast things, you know, you had the guys like Bill Jeans, you know, out there. You had the, programs like Arcadia, Huntington Beach, you know, some of these mid-sized agencies that had their big personality guy at the range, Burbank's another one, you know, who were running these ramshot programs that were phenomenal, but you were never going to promote out of it. You know, we all share that thing of, you know, no, not on the Chiefs Christmas card list, you know, nobody's favorite. Everybody remembers us for being horrible to them on the range and having all these standards and accountability. And, you know, but we had good programs. Larry and those guys did a great job with their program, but they were dealing with Metropolitan Division, and that was it. And then, finally, when Larry got up to the academy, it was literally kind of a force of nature, and they knew what they were getting when they recruited Larry up there. Lou Salcio, great dude. The guy who started Salcio brought Larry up was a phenomenal figure at LAPD. And, but, again, it's like, I can't do this with 12 people. I need 50. Larry, we can't give you 50. No, we got to have 50. They got 50, but believe me, somebody downtown will never forget that, they had put 38 heavyweight, selected people, get yanked out of wherever they were to go up there and do the range program for Larry. And, instantaneously, all that stuff ends up going away at some point with the personality. So I just don't see a lot of, it's not a good thing to be, it's hard to commit career suicide. And it's sad that any of these LE firearms programs, if you want to do well with it, you got to commit career suicide to do it. And that is not an in thing right now at all. And it's not bred in. And, especially when you got people who are coming from environments where, it's not a calling to them. This is a calling. What we do is a calling,
Absolutely.
And if it's not, and so a lot of these range programs are filled up with target graders and PowerPoint readers. People who wasn't a calling for them. It wasn't a passion. They're not out spending, I got 6 figures into the amount of training I've done myself out of my own pocket. A lot of other people got, Harleys and other stuff and whatever. They don't have 6 figures worth of going and spending their own time and dime to go train. It's just not a thing, and you got to do that. And that's a sad thing. It's a sad state of affairs, in law enforcement, that's how it has to be. And Larry was sort of a shining example of the level you have to sacrifice to do this well. And, the other thing back in the day, you had to sort of prove yourself as a cop to be the firearms dude people would listen to. Larry's got 2 medals of valor that were hard-earned ones. Those weren't second place medals of valor or community. Didn't get a medal of valor for his community policing that week. Larry was erasing evil, from the planet. That's what Larry was doing to get those. And, there's a lot of that. I think, we're missing a ton of that now that, a lot of these become retirement jobs for people who can't cut it, who haven't cut the mustard, who haven't, can't talk with any level of experience and failures. How much did you learn over Larry's class from stories that weren't just war stories? They were examples of, hey, the reason I teach this is because of this. If you didn't get something out of Larry talking about that officer involved shooting and watching one of his partners get killed right in front of him and ended up kind of taking the guy's gun and working through reloads in the middle of that whole, if that didn't strike you as, here's a guy who maybe knows something, versus what we're listening to now in internet world of, scariest thing I ever did is my mommy didn't leave the light on for me when I came home late. Is their level of experience they're talking from. When you're talking to guys like Larry and for me, Larry, Scotty, John, you sit there and you just shut up and listen because it's all coming from a basis of experience. And now Larry's talking to you instructionally from a basis of experience of not just penciling out that we qualified 10,000 people this quarter. They trained them. They were getting them trained, which says a lot. And then all you need to do is look at the performance now versus then, and it's a different thing. So there's a lot to be learned from a lot of this. And I think those FBI agents they were putting in to these local firearms programs back then, training programs, were actually some pretty experienced agents at doing literally, these are guys who had been in gunfights. Our era, they had all been to Vietnam. They were guys like Larry that had extensive combat experience overseas, stuff like that. We were getting some really good FBI guys instructing us. I'm not going to see how much of that we're going to get these days. So, it's kind of a different era. Hopefully we can preserve it. It's why we're spending so much time and effort on Kegel. It's like the
absolutely.
We are
That's not a joke.
Yeah.
No, it's
That's
not
not
a
a
joke. I
joke.
mean, we are literally setting up Kegel to leave our business to. You know,
Yeah.
you are going to be the mantle carrier of the future of doing this stuff. So we're going to drag you to all the people we learned from. And, you know, for that kid, you know, spending a lot of time with Paul Howe, Larry Mudgett, John Helm, Scott Reitz, you know, he had some time with JR, John Ray out there at LA, Dean Caputo, you know, we're getting him dipped in deep, you know, with a lot of these legendary folks, you know, taking classes with Gelhaus, that type of thing. Everybody needs at least one drink during the show. So I had to say Gelhaus once, but, you know, to carry this stuff on, some pretty serious, experienced people to learn from. And most of us got all that experience through failure. That's where all the wisdom comes from. Yeah. And, you know, boy, you know, Larry, a lot of the funny stuff was some of the failures.
Mhm.
You know, I got a lot out of that class and just hearing the failure stories. When I had them in '89, I was like David, I was a 24-year-old idiot. And, you know, Larry was a lot meaner then. I mean, he was a lot meaner. You were almost afraid to ask a question because, you know, you guys saw when he got fired up a little, he was always fired up back then and had really no patience for anything. He just sat and listened to what he had to say and just did it without blinking. So it was pretty good stuff.
Yeah, I tell
You know-
Kegel and Lane Thayer all the time. It's up to you two.
Yeah.
We're going to be
I do
leaving it up
too.
to you, and so it's going to be up to you two to save the world. Go ahead, Wayne.
My thing with Kegel, and I told him this not long ago, and I know Daryl's told him this. The kid is open-minded. He's intelligent. He's well-spoken. He's well-educated. He's an excellent shooter. He's interested. I basically told him, I says, what you need to do is just work the path you're on and don't screw up. You know, we all have some things we can look at and say, my God, I can't believe I pulled that or did that. But I see David Kegel as truly a future figurehead and prominent person in American firearms training. I believe he's got all of the attributes that it takes that simply need to be polished by experience and learning and considering or working on learning more and developing his level of wisdom. And I think he will be a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
It's good to see a kid like that. You know, you sit there and I know Daryl and I both look at him and think and see part of ourselves in him, you know, just from the youth and enthusiasm. But I think he will be one of the ones.
He literally frightens me on how much him and I are alike. I mean, it is literally, especially at that age, it is just scary talking about childhoods and weird stuff we did, you know. And so it's like, you know, the weird kid is, you know, like 4 reading the encyclopedia and memorizing, you know, ancient Greek battles and stuff like that. I'm like, oh my God, there's another one.
Except for Daryl may actually get.
And my wife, you know, my wife knew me in high school, and she's got, oh my God, he is just like you. And, you know,
Except Daryl Kegel may actually get promoted beyond corporal.
Yeah, no, he'll be, no, that's going to be the thing is with the wisdom we're trying to impart with him is don't be completely like us, or how to temper things a little bit to, you know, put yourself in a position to make, you know, to make things happen rather than just doing them and, you know, the approach of ramming your head through the door is, you know, if he was in position of power somewhere and had some, executive stroke behind him, he could really make something of something great. So, and he's trying to do that now, that little agency he's with. I mean, I'm going to go up there. He's got me fully recruited on board, and we're going to start doing classes. He's doing stuff with his guys. He's already showing that, you know, it's going to be, well, I'm going to take my little police department. We're going to be the best trained guys in this area. And, you know, he's working his tail off towards that goal. And, you know, that's what we've all done. We want to put people out there who are good representatives. And, we take force very seriously in how we use it, and exercise. And yeah, I just had a class this weekend, and kind of when I spilled on the class, I go, you guys do know that, attempted homicide is a crime of the highest order every place in this country. Every time you press that trigger, you are committing the deepest felony there is. And, everybody's like, well, but what if it's, no, you got to find a subsection to justify it in there. The reality is that's the level of seriousness you need to take this every time you press a trigger for real. And that you better be pretty sure one of those subsections applies to you before you do it. And, trying to find people who will teach at that level of seriousness, is hard. It's hard. It's to me, social media is making it worse every day of how serious we need to take this stuff that doesn't, it becomes entertainment versus, pretty serious consequence with every time we pick up a firearm. Wayne likes to say, it's one of my favorite Wayne Dobbs quotes, is every time you touch one, you're making a life, death, and financial decision. And, my thing is, in the real world, every time you press a trigger, you're committing the highest level of felony, and you better be able to find a subsection that applies to you in the penal code for why that was justified. And, if you can do that at some sort of Olympic level speed, that's great. But, for most of us, it's a lot of work to get that depth of understanding. So try and just pass all that stuff on to the people who want it, and kind of ignoring the people who don't. You'll figure it out the hard way. So
Yeah, and that kind of leads us into the last thing I wanted to discuss tonight. You two guys are well known for your focus on assessment. And assessing while shooting, or assessing whether you need to shoot, and then assessing while shooting. And just go back to an anecdote from the Larry class. He and John Helms, as we discussed in the last episode, and is well documented out in history, they who took the Mozambique from gun sight, renamed it the failure drill, and then spread that across the West Coast, and then it's become known to everybody. And Daryl, you touched on social media out there, and you get all these people out there, they're trying to shoot 2 to the body and 1 to the head as fast as they can go and as fast as they can get it done. And folks, that is not a failure drill. That's shooting 2 to the body and 1 to the head as fast as you can do it. All right, don't call it a failure drill, because that's not what it is. And Wayne and Daryl were standing there when I asked the question of the man who formulated the drill, and because he's explaining the failure drill to us, and I was actually kind of scared to ask the question, because I didn't know if I was going to get him to revert back to 1985 Mean Larry for a second or not. And you come out, you fire 2 to the head, and then you go in, if the head's still there, and you make the shot. And so I said, sir, if you've already programmed yourself to fire 3 shots when you come out of the holster, isn't it a chance that you're not going to stop and assess that the head's still there? You're just going to fire that 3rd shot like off into space because the guy's already fallen down or he's quit? And he looked at me like, well, yeah, that was, and he caught himself, I think, right before he slipped into, of course that's the case. Did you catch that, Daryl?
Yeah, it's kind of I feel bad about doing it now, because I kind of violated one of the Daryl rules of you don't put certain stuff on the internet, because you need to come at this point. I work too hard for it, and it's not appreciated. So you can come take a class and we'll explain this stuff to you. The reality is I did that article on why the hammer pair, and I did it because one of the guys I trained executed a textbook perfect failure drill in the field, saved his life, saved a bunch of people's lives years ago, and that guy committed suicide recently. And him and I had debriefed that shooting a lot of training stuff, and I felt I owed it to him as sort of a legacy. And I kind of now regret that thing going out on the internet, because Greg Ellifritz asked me, he asked for permission to share it, which I certainly granted him. And then, of course, it got shared elsewhere. And the reality of the stupidity that I am seeing from people on that, of trying to explain why you do it. I've spent a lot of years diagnosing why you do certain things and how we do them. The reality of that accelerated pair, which is the term Larry uses that I like, that Wayne, we're pretty down with that accelerated pair. Hammer pair we used because that was the gun sight terminology that most people learned. The whole idea of that, of firing 2 rounds and then with one sight picture, is because you can cheat your eyes faster to the head. So you're assessing. That drill allows you to assess faster, not to shoot faster. The whole idea is it allows you to assess faster so you can shoot less. You can already set that sight track. If that head is moving, if the head's still there, it lets you cheat ahead on doing assessment at a higher level. And it's so lost on people, recently, to have some doof on the internet, telling me and Carl Wren, oh, did you guys have to Google that hammer pair? Are you kidding me? This is what we're down to. And this is some deep level stuff that we take, again, very seriously. And we're trying to get to the point of helping people to better assess, to better exercise the use of lethal force, to better be accountable for, shooting at assessment speed, accountability speed, and all of that, rather than pure speed. Hey, if you can do this stuff wicked fast with perfect assessment and high level accountability, knock yourself out. You're my hero. But I find that most people can't. And, so when we try to sit there and the 2 things Wayne and I absolutely hammer on is safety and accountability. And it gets, a lot of that stuff gets lost. It's not cool. And that was part of the nice thing of that class last week, is how much emphasis was placed on safety and accountability. And, it's our thing. And, I'm blessed. I'll turn it over to Wayne. I am blessed to be able to teach with one of I think just short of Larry I think Wayne is the best flat marksmanship instructor around. And, that's why I've always focused more on the gun handling side of things and the tactics. We divide stuff up. So I sort of deep dive on a lot of this stuff on how can we faster assess? How can we better maneuver? How can we do things safer and with higher level of accountability? And, that's our push. And like I said, that was kicked into my head by guys like Larry Mudgett, Dot Reitz, and John Helms, and Pat Rogers, and Bill Jeans. And I'm blessed for it, and I'm going to try and pass it on. But boy, social media makes it tough. It makes it very tough. And now I'll let Wayne rant.
It's all yours, Wayne.
I don't know if I'm going to rant.
Luminaries don't have to rant. They just live.
Yeah, right. Thank you.
Yeah, he's 10 years ahead.
I wonder, is there a ribbon I can put on my suit for that, for my lapel? I need a ribbon. Daryl's already covered a lot, but the fact is that overwhelming everything with regard to firearms, whether it's in the home, hunting, at the range, or in the street, is the issue of safety. And people want to push that aside and say, well, when things are dangerous, I don't need to worry about this safety rule or that safety rule. And we can show you all kinds of examples of where that doesn't work and where it creates a mess, creates a tragedy, creates an unneeded shooting or somebody getting hurt. So the safety rules always apply, even in the heat of combat. The safety rules apply. Accuracy and precision. And I did a podcast with Brian Eastridge a few weeks ago and talked about precision. And precision and accountability go hand in hand. You can't be firing shots that aren't hitting. You can't be doing that because, first of all, it's losing the fight for you. You're wasting your time, and you're not stopping an attack, and things are going to spin out of control. The other thing is it puts the public at risk. It puts other officers at risk. It puts the citizens that are in the vicinity at risk. One of the things I throw out at people, and Daryl's heard me say it dozens of times, is especially if we get some officers in a class or we're talking to officers, is say, I want you to think about the last 5 or 10 operational shootings your department has had or that have taken place with agencies in this area. And I'll say, where did they happen? What were the circumstances? Where was this? Where was that one? Where was that one? And they all take place overwhelmingly on parking lots and on street sides, a few in alleys, some of them inside structures, but not too many. And I said, so if we took a portable target and a target frame and set up a target at that location and drove out there right now with a magazine of ammo and a shooter, would you want to hold a training drill right there? And they're all horrified at the prospect of setting up a target frame in a Walmart parking lot or a 7-Eleven or whatever and shooting a magazine of ammo. And I say, well, if that's not okay to do a training drill there, then it's not okay to be missing in a fight with, because there's no backstops and there's downrange hazards. So the accountability issue always looms huge, and people don't want to acknowledge that. They want to feel like, oh, well, if I miss in this gunfight on this city street, well, that bullet just turns into a butterfly and flutters to the ground and doesn't cause any problems for anybody. Doesn't work. And it basically is a Rule 4 violation when you get right down to it. And that is that you have failed to consider your scene and your backstop and the circumstances before you fired. With regard to assessment, if you're shooting, I'm just going to step out here and make a flat statement. If you're shooting faster than a .30 split, you're shooting faster than you can react or assess or change your path. That is a physical truth. Human reaction time hovers around 25 hundredths to 30 hundredths of a second. If you're shooting shots faster than that, then you're shooting faster than you can change your actions. Just like the failure drill properly done, you fire 2 center hits. If the head is still there, then you deliver the headshot. If the head's not there, then you know the 2 shots worked in some form or fashion. If you're shooting faster than that and moving to that headshot faster than that 30.3 split time, I hate to even use the term, then what you've done is you've outrun your headlights. And there is a very prominent trainer out there now that did it with a rifle, and he will tell you straight up front that he shot too fast. He had trained to shoot super fast splits, and so he did in a fight. And he fired 1 or 2 shots down range with a carbine that shouldn't have been launched. So the use of a firearm, whether it be rifle, pistol, or shotgun in an operational shooting, is not something that should be happening with a lot of rapidity as far as the volume of shots or the speed of shots. It should be done with a lot of discipline, a lot of precision, and a lot of assessment, so that you don't get yourself or somebody else in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I did an experiment down at our range, and I may have talked about this in another episode. I'm not sure. I know we've both talked about it in a phone conversation, where I set up a target, went to 7 yards, and I fired 2 to the chest, 1 to the head. And I did several iterations. I went as fast as I could go. Yeah, fast draw, hit the split as quick as I could, did the transition, and fired the shot as quickly as I could. And then I did a number of iterations where I fired the first shot, confirmed my sights for the second shot, made a decision to fire, did a transition, confirmed my sights for the third shot, made a decision to fire. And the difference in those 2 ways of doing it over 3 shots was 0.29.
Mm-hmm. That's about right.
And
because you probably fired the splits. Your split time on the pair was probably around 0.35 to 0.4, maybe a little higher. And then your split time to the headshot was probably about 0.5, 0.6.
yeah,
Correct.
when I was going as hard as I could get, like going just for pure speed, my split to the second shot was coming in at about 0.26, and my transition was coming in at about 0.54. And when I was shooting it, where I was confirming my sights and making a conscious decision to fire each shot, my split time to the second shot was at 0.4, and my transition was at 0.6.
Something we badly overlook, and when we're doing range firearms training, square range firearms training, we have a target in front of a shooter, and we tell him, hey, Daryl, you shoot number 2 and I'll shoot number 3, and Lee, you shoot number 4, and don't crossfire, et cetera, and all that. And so that target is static when we shoot it, correct? We say, okay, I want you to fire a pair on this target. Then you come up and you fire a pair, and then you move to the head and fire a good headshot. And we turn around and pat ourselves on the head and say, that was a nice failure drill. The problem with that is, and we all know it, is the first time you stuck a bullet in somebody's torso, they're not going to be at that spot for the second go round. You're going to have to reacquire. You're going to have to get sights on another spot on that adversary for the second shot, and the same. You're going to have to do it again for the third shot, which is why Daryl and I play a game and we work a drill called a split failure all the time to try and simulate that some. But the fact is that you can sit there and work on your hottest pair, and your first shot may be a good one, but your second shot's going to be a miss or peripheral hit, and your third one you're going to have to be hunting for. So you shoot at assessment speed, you shoot where the threat is and not where you think. Training on a static target may set you up for unrealistic expectations.
Yeah. When you were talking just before that, and you were talking about running the drill on the Walmart parking lot, I was struck by, we've been talking about cop stuff all night long, by and large, from that perspective. But for the private citizen, you're more likely to be involved in a self-defense situation in a parking lot of a gas station or grocery store or mall
Right.
parking lot or something like that than you are somebody kicking in your door and coming into your house.
Right.
And so that's the standard that you need to be trained into as well. And I just wanted to touch on that, because if our listeners and the folks on YouTube say, well, they're talking about cop stuff, I'm a private citizen, apply. No. It very much applies to you. And I'll throw it back to each of you if you want to touch on that a little bit more.
We tell people that, we've been credited with pretty much the whole idea that, our first responder classes are not just for law enforcement. We use law enforcement, a lot of terminology, training stuff, because that's all the people who are going to be judging you are from that world. But the reality is 3 a.m. in your, your living room, you're the first responder. Equally, you're sitting there gassing your car at the neighborhood watering hole, and one or several of the local hyenas decide to make a victim out of you. You're going to be the first responder, and you need to hold yourself accountable, to a lot of these standards. If you watch what we are doing to American law enforcement on level of accountability and expectations of how much time we are expecting them to be doing absolutely perfect evaluations of threat and perfect applications of force, if you don't think you're going to be held to those same levels of accountability, you are sadly mistaken. In a lot of places in this country that also tend to correlate with the places in this country where you're more likely than anywhere else to be a victim of one of these crimes. And, the fact of the matter remains, you're going to need to go get gas at some point. You're going to need to venture into a large box store parking lot, parking structures outside of stores, places where criminals and those looking to get paid congregate. And, the today's social world, the media, it's hard for me even to use the word criminal justice anymore. The legal system you're going to be involved in is not set up to be your friend or to be, understanding of the circumstances you're facing. So it's absolutely critical that you are doing everything you can to shoot to high levels, to shoot high level of accountability, to be training to shoot to a high level of accountability. And, if your idea of that is the most, the fastest, the bestest, knock yourself out. What we do is we try to be the leastest and the most efficient. And the terminology Wayne and I use, because if nothing else we took away from Larry's class, and I got that 30 something years ago, was, words mean thing, and terminology is super important. Wayne and I harp on people, you got to be legally, morally, and ethically correct on every application of lethal force you do, or any force for that matter. And that's a very, very high standard today, and it's going to take work. Just purchasing a gun or going to the coolest class on the internet, or some of these YouTube celebrities, they knock yourself out, but you're going to probably find out that wasn't, when you built your experience making YouTube videos versus actually dealing with some of the most dangerous felons in the country. I don't know how well you're preparing yourself for dealing with what the actual problem is.
Yep, it's true.
Wayne, it's yours.
I don't know that there's much I can add. There are an awful lot of people out there conducting firearms training, and at an awful lot of levels, and there are an awful lot of people and there's a couple of 3 categories they fall into, and I think you need to be careful and people need to watch for it. One of them is you will see a category of people that have been tier 1 or similar military operational personnel that spent time with special missions units or special forces in Afghanistan, Iraq, or other places. And they're now teaching handgun and carbine classes. What they know and what their experience is from overseas is in no way applicable to dealing with deadly threats on a Walmart parking lot in an urban area. And in fact, most of the methodologies we see them teach are completely contraindicated for use in a civilized area, shall we say. High volumes of fire, low volumes of accountability, and a lot of possibility of downrange hazard and maybe shaky decision making. That's one group. The other group I see, and they scare me even worse, and Daryl and I have talked about this a lot, is they've gone to 1 or 2 instructor classes or 1 or 2 operational classes, and they have no operational experience whatsoever, and basically double-digit or less hours of formalized training in this, and they decide they're an instructor. And almost universally, their safety practices are horrible, their range practices are horrible, and they wouldn't know how to manage a hazardous situation if they were forced to. They scare me to death. Both of them do, but the second one really does. The first one, at least, has ostensibly dealt with an armed adversary in combat, and perhaps successfully. But the second ones are literally like saying, "Hey, I've got a 15-year-old stepdaughter here at home." It's literally like me saying, "Hey, Faith, I want you to go do a senior level class on economics and teach that class and handle it." It's about the same analogy of lack of knowledge and competence and ability. So that's what I would have to say on that.
What's the third? You said there were 3 groups.
The third one is you see some fairly experienced or fairly competent people out there, and they will be typically training nothing but police. And some of them are very good, some of them are mediocre, some of them there's probably some excellent ones there too. They're not actually out there, I would say, in the marketplace to any great extent. The problem with the law enforcement training world is that it's extremely incestuous and extremely insular. If you go and I would tell you, if you went and surveyed 1,000 so-called law enforcement firearms instructor tomorrow and asked them what kind of outside training or knowledge they have sought in the last 5 years, and you would be in the single-digit percentages of responses of people that have. So they're basically just doing their game over and over again and hoping that it works. That's a harsh thing to say, and I'm talking about my own profession that I'm retired from and that Daryl's retired from and that you're currently in. but we all know the ugly secrets of current law enforcement firearms training.
Yeah, the institutional firearms instructor programs are all about running a course of fire, running a line of shooters, grading targets, and basically getting people qualified, and not necessarily teaching the individual use of the firearm. And
Yeah.
I don't know many law enforcement instructors who could actually successfully teach that aren't doing stuff on their own outside of that.
We should do one time we should sit down and knock out a podcast. And this is a loaded question of what is qualified.
Yeah,
that's
we
right.
would leave blood and guts all over the floor.
Kind of alongside what you're talking about, Lee, is going back to the class with Larry. Even somebody of his stature and literally in his era, is basically serving up the best hostage rescue team in the world at the time. And
Mm-hmm.
you listen to the fights he had within his own institution.
Oh, no kidding.
This is how we've always done it. What the heck do you know? And we've all had that fight. And so there's, I think a lot of this, to kind of sum it as a summary of what Wayne was talking about, is what we have is a ton of people teaching way out of their lane. And a lot of them are just driving on the wrong side of the highway. It's not even that they're in the wrong lane. They are actually completely going the wrong direction. And, there's a lot to learn from those military guys. But on the other hand, when you're talking ROEs, rules of engagement versus constitutional application of force, they're two big different things. And, if you can't intelligently have that conversation, you're going to have a problem teaching. We have some exceptional technical shooters out there. There's a lot to learn from those guys. We've been learning from them from the beginning of this. Most of this all comes out of the technical shooting world, but until it's been vetted out in the practical shooting world or the use of force application, it's just that technical. And the problem is we got a lot of people who are stepping outside of that lane as well. Same with some of these people who could probably do a good job of delivering, if they actually focused on it, a basic home firearm safety course. But they want to teach, flaming helicopters and, SWAT roles and all this other crap to, fellow, Walter Middies and Sally Middies out there.
Don't forget the submachine gun burst off repel.
Yeah, you got to have that too. And so, as a guy who's actually rappelled down an elevator shaft, it's so highly overrated. But the whole thing with this is, there's a lot of really good people out there trying to do a good job, and I think if a lot of these folks would just really stay in their lane, they do a great job. Sadly, a lot of them don't, and I'm more than happy to hand a lot of this off to a lot of people who are better at doing stuff than I am. But, we are trying to spread the gospel on what we do know. So it is what it is. I think some of us have hit an age in life. It's like, go ahead, figure it out.
Yeah.
You guys got this.
There is a place for high level technical shooting and technical shooting training, and skill definitely is an important thing. And, we spent 4 days on a pure marksmanship. And, the better your skill with the firearm, the better you're going to be able to devote your mental energy to doing the assessments and the processing. So none of the three of us or anybody else that's been on this show is going to argue against good technical skill. I just question the real world application of trying to, if your whole training methodology is making sure draw speed is under a certain speed and
there you go.
and your split times and all that kind of, if there's not any intermixing of that with assessments and drawing and not shooting, and because if you're programming yourself that every time that pistol comes out of the holster, you're going to fire a shot, then you're programming yourself to fire a shot when you don't need to.
Oh, every time I'm running our accountability stuff, I'm becoming more and more devious as to how to give people inputs to correctly do this stuff. And every time I'm doing it, I'm finding more and more people are finding that, oh my God, I've been training to do the wrong thing. Because they end up doing exactly what they're training to do. And I go, hey, that was fast. And that was an amazingly super great job of that high speed failure drill you just did. Can you look at that target and tell me what your shooting indicator was? Oh my God, it didn't have the gun part in there. Yep, you just toased an on shoot. But it was fast. Damn, it was fast. Yeah, you smoked yourself into that murder charge like nobody's business. And, so it's again, this, what we do takes some focus on exactly what it is. And again, I don't mind, I think, some of the funnest times I had in my life were shooting competitively. There's nothing wrong with it. And I think it's wonderful. It's a great sport. I think it's a great sport for people who do what we do to do. But if you want to, but on the other hand, you're picking up some pretty atrocious habits for application of constitutional use of lethal force, and pick your battles on that, I guess, or balance, and decide what you're going to make permanent in your neural pathways. So
there you go. Well, gentlemen, we've probably been going an hour and a half or maybe a little more, and I could sit and talk to you guys for hours because I've done it.
And we did.
we do better over barbecue.
We've done it. Yeah, we've done it numerous times. But we're probably reaching or past the limit of what an episode should be. So just with that, Wayne, any closing thoughts?
No, I don't think so. One last thing, the high-end technical shooting versus the assessment-driven street level shooting. The analogy I always use is it's like Formula One driving versus patrol driving and patrol pursuit driving of a police car. They're both involved vehicles and they both involve stress, but the scenarios and the contexts are entirely different and have entirely different stakes at play.
Daryl?
Yeah, I'm enjoying kind of the last, these podcasts you're doing on at least visiting some of this history so we don't lose it. Kind of circling back to the Larry thing, guys like that aren't going to be around forever. And I think it's important for us to learn a lot from people like that who have done what most of us could never do or have even the opportunity anymore to do. That Larry spent a lot of time at the very tippity tip of that spear, doing the Lord's work and then passing it down with a level of passion that is unusual and unique. And I just think many of us have been blessed to be able to be mentored by guys like that. And I truly appreciate you guys, the rest of our group, taking an interest in coming up with Wayne.
Oh, we've lost Daryl.
There went Daryl.
Lost Daryl. All right.
Oh,
well, I guess I'll go ahead and start signing off. Maybe that's the sign that we're done. Folks, if you're enjoying the show, please share the links. That's what's going to help it keep growing. I do appreciate all the positive feedback that we're getting. It's been very personally gratifying to me. Some of the phone calls I've gotten within the last week from some names that I know from the firearms industry, people I've read in gun magazines and everything, that over these last few episodes have like, wow, I'm getting to hear people, people talked about that I knew and that I trained with, and thank you for keeping this going alive. So I'm guys that are appreciating that from that perspective. I'm very much gratified that you're getting something out of the podcast from that end, from the people who, this is all new to you. This is the first time you're hearing this stuff. I'm getting some feedback from that too. And I'm very much appreciative of the fact that the podcast and the shows are being beneficial to you. And we're going to keep doing it as long as we can keep it fresh and there's interest. Wayne, thanks for coming on tonight, and thanks for swapping text messages every now and then when we got a vent and some of the fun phone conversations and fire pit conversations that we have.
You're very welcome. It's great to be here. Thanks.
And I'm sorry Daryl's not here right at the end to wrap up. Looks like he had a couple of technical difficulties. But folks, again, share the links with your intelligent friends. Don't share it with the dumb ones. And this is that Weems guy signing off. And thank you for your time.